Amiga slot machines. All this and more coming up. It's This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Real Player is better than Winamp.
Voodoo on the Move.
Amiga PCI.
All this and more coming up on this week's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Neil. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome to episode 175. I'm refreshed, but I want to check you're refreshed as well, because there were a couple of comments that you sounded a bit tired last week, but I think we both were, weren't we?
Yeah, I don't think I slept very well last week. I am much better this week, though. Thank you for the concern.
Good to hear. And I had the best part of a week off. I went over to Wales for a brief holiday in a log cabin. It was borderline glamping, I would say. It was lovely. Didn't see a single other person, other than my wife, of course, near or around the cabin for the entire week. When we were checked in, we turned up and there was a guy who kind of knew what was going on and said, "Oh, yeah, it's over there. In you go." And that was it. We didn't see anyone else. It was very relaxing. Went to Ross-on-Wye. Have you ever been to Ross-on-Wye?
I've never even heard of Ross-on-Wye.
Lovely town. Lovely town. And of course, I went through the charity shops in Ross-on-Wye, and I actually found in the wild a real Amstrad CPC cassette tape in a charity shop.
Animal, vegetable, mineral?
Close. It was one of the AM soft pack. It was a word processor. Was it AMS Right? I can't remember what it's called.
AMS word or something?
Something like that. I didn't buy it because I already had that one, and I kind of liked the idea of leaving it out there for someone else to discover next to I think it was next to Cliff Richard and Tina Turner and other period tapes.
I do understand something went wrong, though, on your trip.
Something
with your loaf of bread.
Oh, yes, yeah. So, like I say, it was glamping. Day one, I was sat just relaxing on the sofa in the hut, and I saw this little mouse. In fact, it wasn't a little mouse. It was a big mouse just scurry along the skirting board. And I thought, oh, no, we've got trouble here. Went to bed, woke up the next morning, and my breakfast, which I'd left in a thick material bag for life on the worktop, bag chewed through, bread chewed through, ruined. Just, yeah, there was a slight mouse problem in that hut. So that was a shame. They didn't come back after that. I think we just disturbed them because the hut had been empty for so long. But yeah, no biggie. That's nature, right? We were out in the woods. Can't complain about a few mice.
No. They've got their stuff to do as well.
They did. And then coming up this week, I'm making a retro road trip this week. Very excited because so that's me, Holly and Richard are going to a container which may or may not contain quite a few really good dedicated arcade machines to put in the arcade archive and a bunch of computer stuff as well.
Oh, nice.
So we've hired a Luton van. We're doing a stop on the way to pick up another machine, which we know is working. But as for the container, it hasn't been opened for 10 years, if not longer. So are we going to find pristine arcade machines, or are we going to find more mice, rats' nests, mush?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah, remember the last raid video that I saw was Alex going to one and that Star Wars cabinet just folding down because it had rotted.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed. It's a container. Containers should be waterproof.
We would hope so, yeah. But you don't know. Did you lock the door with a family of rats in there? Have they been breeding for 10 years, living off of the arcade cabinets? We'll find out. I've got high hopes, though. Yeah. How's your week been?
I've been looking at trailers. There's two trailers I want to talk about. The first is the Doom Dark Ages trailer. So this is the sequel to Doom Eternal, and it's Doom set in the Dark Ages. So it's got a bit of a Quake feel to it.
Oh, no. I was going to suggest a bit of a heretic feel to it.
Yeah, it's a bit Quake and a bit heretic. It's quite interesting. It's still got guns and stuff, but there's dragons involved in it, and there's all sorts of skull-powered weapons. That's where the Quake side of things comes in. So it's really quite interesting. It looks really good, and I always like the kind of medieval kind of settings rather than sci-fi for it. So it's quite interesting. But it does make me think: have they united Doom and Quake now finally, or is this feels more like a Quake game? Is the Quake franchise not as popular as Doom? I don't know.
Well, it says it's a prequel to the
That's
Doom
right.
of 2016. The original Doom, of course, was based on Mars, wasn't it? So
Yes.
is this
Or
the Dark
Phobos,
Ages
maybe?
of Mars? What's
don't
this?
know.
Have they not gone to Mars yet?
Don't know.
It says, a never-before-seen dark and sinister medieval war against hell. With heavy metal music. What's not to like about that?
Yeah, that again, heavy metal music and Quake. Aye. I've also been watching a trailer for development on an Atari STE 50 frames a second racer from Jonathan Thomas. We've mentioned before the upcoming Amiga Outrun thing that I've now learned leads an 030 and AGA, but this just runs on a stock 68,000 Atari STE, and it looks absolutely amazing. It even sounds amazing. Still a work in progress, still little things not quite right with it, but the actual game itself, you get a sense of speed. It looks absolutely fantastic. I'm really excited to see a racing game in the kind of Outrun Lotus kind of area. You've seen it, haven't you, Neil?
Yeah, sprite scaling, 50 frames per second. It's very impressive. It keeps popping up on my Twitter feed. I would describe it as a super smooth version of Wet Le Mans. Still a little bit of work to be done on it, the way the car kind of floats on the track at the moment. But those are just minor tweaks, easily fixed, I'm sure. I say easily fixed. I don't know. I don't know how he's developing this. But it seems like he's broken the back of the really difficult thing, which is a super high frame rate and a super smooth track with scenery beside it. Needs an STE, so obviously it needs blitter. But it just makes me think that must be portable over to the Amiga. It would be nice once it's done to see if that can be done on a stock Amiga 500 as well.
Yeah, I'm not saying I don't want to bash the Amiga Outrun thing, but needing an 030 is different than, I mean, the talk was this is the Outrun the Amiga should always have got, but if it needs an 030, it kind of knocks the.
Is that just where development is with it? Is it
I'm not
at the
sure.
moment it needs an 030 and then we'll refine it down to a stock 1200?
That's not how I read it when someone
Okay.
said it, but I whether that's a misunderstanding or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because there is a point, there is a threshold somewhere. I don't know where it is on the technical specs where you could say, I just run MAME and the arcade ROMs.
Yeah.
So it's the beauty of running it on lower powered hardware and getting as close as possible. That's the challenge that I enjoy seeing. Yeah.
I intentionally chose this story title to misdirect and troll you more even than usual. When I'm saying Real Player is better than Winamp, what could I possibly mean, Neil?
Real Player is better than Winamp. Are you getting nostalgic, Dave, for the Real Audio format or the Real Player list of odd Chinese channels that used to be able to pop up? Do you remember that? Have you cracked?
You told me about them, but no.
Oh, okay.
I remember downloading videos in .rm and them being terrible. However, they were maybe 1 megabyte in size. I don't mean that. What I mean is, if you've not already guessed, a real physical player in the shape of Winamp. I don't mean Real Player at all, which was awful, and I'm glad it's gone. I wonder if there's anyone who doesn't know what Winamp is. I guess you would need to be a certain age to know what it is. Maybe if you're under 30 or thereabouts, you might not have seen it.
What I do see with the youngsters is nostalgia for things like Windows Media Player skins, more so than Winamp and the skins. You're a little bit older again when you would have been an age that you used Winamp. But in particular, it's the Windows Media Player skin that's like the big head. Do you know the one? The big blue head, and in the brain is the visualizer. I see that one pop up a lot on my feed.
Yeah, I think maybe some people don't know. Our listeners, almost all of them will know. But for everyone else, I think we know it's a cozy, safe way to access a whole world of music that's not going to try and sell you something. towards the end of the 90s, the MP3 exploded onto the scene. A few things happened at just the right time for it to work. Our computers were powerful enough to decode an MP3 at the same time as playing it. An MP3 file is a highly compressed sound file that works, that sounds
How does
just
it
the
work,
same,
Dave?
really.
How does it work? Tell us.
It works through an algorithm that small's good. Loads of people get access to the web. Moving on swiftly, loads of people get access to the web. Around that time, the total users of the internet was growing by something like 50% every year, and of course, good old piracy. File sharing sites like Napster, Emule, etc. That was the kind of perfect storm for Winamp to suddenly become what everyone used. And I don't know about you, Neil, but for me, it was fun and it was exciting and it was new. I was able to listen to pretty much any piece of music that I wanted, whenever I wanted. And that actually sounds like nothing special now, because now we can just type anything into YouTube or Spotify or whatever and listen to almost anything instantly.
Yeah, and you got to remember, we were listening in a way that wasn't curated. It wasn't, oh, you like this, therefore now you're going to listen to this. It was very much in Napster, for example. I would just type in BR and see all of the music that came up starting with BR and explore it. You know, it was a very different way of enjoying music and very exciting. Exciting is the word for sure.
Yeah. Before this, if you thought of a piece of music you hadn't heard, if someone said, "Can you remember this song?" you had to remember it. You couldn't just type it into a search engine and hear it, and then all of a sudden we could. It might take you a couple of hours to download it, to get it and to find it and to get it downloaded through the file sharing thing, but you could do it. And before then you couldn't.
Yeah, I'm going to correct myself already, just slightly into the first story. It was a big green head on Windows Media Player. It wasn't a big blue head. So go back and delete your comments correcting me there. I also remember from this period the joy of ripping your own CD library. So I had CDs. I saw one of these in the tip yesterday. One of those great big towers that you slot all of your CDs in for storage. Had one of those next to my computer, just for my music CDs. Had my computer CDs were elsewhere. And just ripping all of those to MP3, carefully organizing them into folders. In my case, onto zip disks, because although MP3s are small, hard drives were pretty small then as well compared to where we are today. So 100 meg on a zip disk, that got me quite a few albums stored away on there. So I enjoyed that process of ripping and curating. And again, there's the plague of choice, isn't there? If you really want to, you could go to your torrent site of choice and you could download an archive of every song from the 80s, and you could instantly have a gigantic MP3 collection. And it's no way near as satisfying as having curated your own CD library. There's something special about that.
I remember going into MP3 tagging programs and getting the tags exactly right just so that it propped up right on the MP3 player. I couldn't abide having them all messed up on there. It was, it made my back crawl. Music listening has changed since then, though. A lot of the music that I listen to now is streamed. I just let YouTube Music play the next song when I'm driving, and if I don't like it, I'll hit the forward button on my steering wheel and move on to the next track, and that's good enough for me. I have gone back to CDs and vinyl records, though, because I do like the technology disconnect.
Haven't gone back to CDs myself, but I have still got all of my old CDs in the loft. I'm so tempted to get them down, Dave. I need to get another one of those CD towers to put them all in. Yeah,
maybe steal it when you're at the tip. Have you seen one? Would you ever do that? Would you steal something from the tip?
Should we move on?
No. Would you steal something from the tip, Neil?
Well, I did borrow something yesterday when I was throwing things away in the tip on top of the electronics bin. It was a lovely 1980s Sanyo little radio, and all it needed was a little bit of a clean-up. So that's what I did, and it's in my garage now, and it's my garage FM radio, and it works perfectly.
Good. I'm glad you did that.
Didn't need to go in
rescued
landfill. But yeah, you're not technically supposed to take anything from my tip. It's not allowed.
I like the technology disconnect, and while Winamp might not sound like disconnected technology, this device we're going to talk about might well be it. It's been made to look like a hi-fi separate, and mostly it's just one big screen, a touch screen, but with the surrounding frame that matches how Winamp looks in Windows. So it is recognizable as Winamp. And once it's on the screen, it does look like Winamp, the UI, and you can touch the buttons just like you would do with Winamp UI. It's called Linamp, so L instead of W, and it can do files, so you can put files on it, but it can also do Bluetooth and even control a CD player, and it can connect to Spotify. So for someone like me, if I was to use this, if I was to add it to my hi-fi stack, I would want to use it only for files, or maybe have it control the CD player. But if you want a device that isn't your phone, so that you don't see notifications, so that you don't have to hold the internet in your hand to do it, then that might be what you're after, because you could do Spotify on it, but you could do Spotify in a way that doesn't involve notifications and emails and instant messages.
And this is a standalone product, is it?
Yes.
This is not just like a strange resolution screen that plugs into your PC and you actually run Winamp on it.
No, the entire thing is self-contained. If you want a device that isn't your phone, though, I'm not sure how the Bluetooth works for that, because really that would just be using it as a better speaker for your phone. You connect your phone to it and still control it with your phone. So that's not quite what you're looking for there. But for me, the line with digital disconnect comes after this device. I think this is still a digital disconnect device, and I think it's a good way to get away from notifications, social media, news, especially with the election going on just now in the UK. You can't get away from that. And of course, I'm looking at it all the time, but notifications, even if it is high technology, or you might want to consider it low technology because it's kind of 20 years ago, it's still disconnect. What do you think, Neil? Am I right?
I'm just mulling over the Bluetooth aspect you were talking about there. You've said about connecting your phone to it as if it's a speaker, but is it not the other way around? Is it not to connect your Winamp head unit to a Bluetooth speaker?
No,
it's not. Okay.
No. So it's got 4 input buttons. It's got files, it's got CD, it's got Bluetooth, and it's got Spotify.
Right.
So I believe
Bluetooth has an input.
Right. Bluetooth audio.
Yeah. My first thought, I want this as a car head unit. Put this in my car. Let me have a Winamp car head unit, please, as I've got a touchscreen car head unit anyway. It's a funny story because in the Arcade Archive shop, we've got these mini arcade marquee light boxes. The marquees are normally at the top of arcade machines. A little light box so you can put in an Outrun or a Ghosts and Goblins marquee, and you can have it on your desk and you can light it up. And it was only last month or the month before that I said to Dan, who makes these, can you make me a Winamp one? Just a slide, instead of a marquee, the Winamp thing. I wanted to call it WinLamp.
Oh.
This isn't a joke. But that wasn't a build-up just for the punchline. I actually wanted to make this thing. And this was based on the fact that quite often over the years, I've seen a 3D render of a real Winamp device appear on my social media feed, just a virtual render. So it's really nice to see this come to life as a real thing now and a functional thing. And a reminder, like you say, of simpler times. And it goes way further than anything I had an idea of, because it is actually a functioning Winamp box, which I love. The only way this could be better really would be if they were actual buttons and not a touch screen, and sliders as well.
Yeah, I've seen comments from people saying that's what they want. A few people saying they're disappointed it's not there. I mean, come on, be realistic.
Yeah. Just be happy it exists.
But if this was to catch on, if suddenly people started making these and people started maybe even selling these, so you could buy a Winamp unit like that, and integrated a slimline CD player into it, so that you had a CD player and Winamp and Spotify, connect your phone to it as a Bluetooth speaker and have your files on it. If this caught on, then maybe people will start making it with buttons. Maybe.
I guess surely someone out there has 3D printed a little Winamp box. I'll have to have a look for that. Someone must have tried it at some point. But the trick is making it all functional, isn't it? It's easy enough to 3D print something and go, there you go, there's a physical Winamp, but it's got to work nicely as well. I was thinking to myself, I love it. And I was thinking, what other virtual things am I nostalgic for that could become physical things on my desk? And then I remembered, well, Winamp was a virtual hi-fi stack originally in the first place. So what I'm pining for here is just an old hi-fi. I think that would satisfy me as well. But Winamp has a place in my heart. And presumably because this is a touchscreen, this is an advantage of it not having sliders and physical buttons, is perhaps in future you can skin it again. I mean, I like the classic Winamp look, but perhaps you could put other skins on it and have other looks. Perhaps you could make it look like Windows Media Player.
No reason at all why you couldn't.
But I think this is the seed perhaps for our question of the week this week, if you agree, Dave, which is, what virtual thing would you like to see made physical?
Yeah, let's ask that.
We'll come back to that at the end of the story, but at the end of the show. So get thinking, everyone. As an aside, I tend to use a VLC player these days for everything on my PC because it is compatible with so much and easy to use. But did you know, Dave, that VLC has skins too? And you can download a Winamp skin for it. So if you really want, if you've got VLC on your machine now, you can very quickly download a Winamp skin and make it look like Winamp if you get the urge, which I think is quite nice.
Now, as far as I can see, there's no current plans to commercially make this. But I expect if you go to the project page, we can replicate it yourself. Links in the show notes. And I also should mention that the source code for Winamp is, if it's not been released, it's about to be released. So we might see lots of homebrew Winamp versions on Windows again. It might cause a resurgence in Winamp. I don't know. Maybe replacing what you've got in VLC, or maybe we don't need to replace what you've got in VLC. But links in the show notes if you're interested.
I believe, Dave, there is a page here on winamp.com itself, which says Winamp has announced that it will be opening up its source code to enable collaborative development of its legendary player for Windows on the 24th of September 2024. The source code will be open to developers worldwide. Now, I don't know if that means classic Winamp or whatever the status of current day Winamp is, but that could be something that helps this along as well. Yeah.
Maybe someone will port the source code to a Raspberry Pi Pico and put it in a, like this size. I don't know. Yeah.
I love Winamp. We are very kindly sponsored this week by our good friends at PCBWay.com. Dave.
I want to link back to the previous story. And I noticed reading through all this, the guy that made it said, I used Onshape to design the sheet metal case and the front cover. And for manufacturing, I researched several providers, including Send Cut Send and Pinoco, but because some of those options didn't ship to my country or were too expensive, I ended up going with PCBWay. So it turns out PCBWay did the sheet metal case and front bezel for the last story. So I thought it was a neat little thing. It wasn't intentional. I didn't pick the story and then just because of that. It was afterwards I realised that, So PCBWay had a link to the last story. They do more than PCBs, and that's the message I want to get out there. They do lots of different things, including sheet metal cases and the front bezel for this, CNC milling, all sorts of things.
So thank you to PCBWay.com for keeping Winamp alive, for supporting the show. Have it your way, Dave. Have it PCB way.
Is that a new?
I thought I'd try it out.
Yeah.
Did it work?
We're loving it.
Let's talk laptops, Dave, because we don't often do that on the show. And while laptops for me have become something of a generic, wafer-thin, usually silver tool, and nothing much more than that, I remember a period of weird, wonderful, and hot, and I mean hot, not as in looks, I mean hot, laptops that came my way. Laptops by manufacturers trying to outdo each other with bells and whistles, sometimes using actual desktop parts to keep costs down and to improve performance while burning your lap. in a way, I guess the development and the fight between laptop manufacturers is a little bit like the 8-bit micro days, where they were all trying something a little bit different, trying to set the standard until Ultrabooks and Apple came along with their super sleek silver titanium laptops, and things went in that direction. And we had the arrival of a curious thing in this period, the gaming laptop. Now, the one that stands out for me was in 2001. I needed a new laptop for work. I was curiously given a budget to spend by the boss and free range to select one. Thank you, boss. I was very excited as a 20-something with a blank check, effectively, to choose a laptop for myself. I was working in network and server support, so I needed something that would help me with those things, the correct ports to plug into the switches and configure them and things like that. So what did I buy? Well, the market at the time was dominated by things like IBM with their ThinkPads, Dell with their Inspirons and Latitudes, Compaq with their Presarios. But actually, at the top of the sales charts in 2001 was Toshiba. They were selling more notebooks than anyone else with their Satellite Pro, Tecra, and Portagee laptops. And it was
what was the last one, sorry?
Portagee. It's got accents on the E's, so I assume I thought I'd say it like Banjo Guy.
Yeah.
And it was in February of 2001 that Toshiba announced their first laptop that, perhaps the first laptop that had an NVIDIA GeForce 2 Go GPU in it.
Can I stop you there, Neil?
Go on.
We can't say the first anymore on this show because of what happened last week. When we said the first celebrity endorsed game.
Oh yes, yeah, we'll come on to that. So I did, I did say perhaps,
yes,
perhaps the first laptop with an NVIDIA GeForce 2 Go GPU in it, and also check this out, Dave, a subwoofer in a laptop.
Right, a subwoofer in a laptop. I understand why it's there because laptop sound is that awful tinny stuff. How did it sound with a subwoofer?
Okay, actually, I mean, look, a subwoofer in a laptop is a slightly larger speaker. It's not a subwoofer. It's in the bottom of the laptop. It's pointing down. If you've got it on a desk, it sort of vibrates through the desk as well. It worked. It did make the sound better.
Okay.
And I had to have it. I had to have a laptop with a subwoofer and a GPU in to configure my network switches. It was the equivalent of an SR Nova with a huge sound system. And I did want to do donuts in the supermarket car park. So off I went with the company checkbook. I had a 15-inch screen, had a DVD drive. DVDs, exciting in 2001. I could watch DVDs with my subwoofer, with GPU acceleration to play the DVDs. Gladiator, was that the year Gladiator came out?
Not sure, but Gladiator was the sold lots of DVD players, I'm sure.
Okay. I had my executive laptop bag to put it in, and I was all set to go. And I used it for work. I also took it to LAN parties, and I loved seeing the look on people's faces when I joined in with their games with a laptop, with a little bit of tuning. When I say tuning, I mean turning down the graphics slightly. I could play Battlefield 1942 on my laptop. I could play pretty much all the latest games with a few tweaks. And I do admit it wasn't as good as the kind of desktop PC I could have bought with the money this thing cost. I could have had a all singing, all dancing desktop, but it was an impressive feat. I also couldn't take a desktop with me on the plane, so it was a compromise I was happy to make. Now, 2001 was also the year that we said goodbye to 3DFX, the company that gave us the Voodoo 3D accelerator. They just released the Voodoo 4 range of cards at the back end of 2000. But by this point, I mean, I wasn't even paying attention to 3DFX at this point. They'd lost ground to NVIDIA. They'd lost ground to ATI. They were no longer the dominant force they were. And in 2001, they would actually be bought out by NVIDIA. So that was the end of 3DFX. But they did still make impressive graphics cards. Dave?
I wonder why. I've never thought of this before. I wonder why NVIDIA bought them, because what did they get from it?
There must have been patents that they wanted. Surely
that would
must
be
have been something to do with that. But they were still making impressive graphics cards that could hold their own. A lot of the problem came down to price. They were a bit more expensive than the equivalent cards that supported DirectX, Direct 3D, and that had become the standard. So there was no advantage in having a Glide supporting 3DFX card, except perhaps for backwards compatibility. However, I do wonder, thinking about my 3D accelerated laptop, would 3DFX have found a way to survive if they targeted the laptop market? And what would it have been like to have a 3DFX powered laptop? Well, wonder no more, because a madman has actually done it. Daniel Simeonescu. Sorry about mangling your name, Daniel. Or SDZ on the Vogons forum has created an MXM, that's a mobile PCI Express module, for his Dell Precision M4800 laptop. Now, admittedly, that is a laptop from around 2014, as you might guess from it having PCI Express, but it does run Windows XP just fine natively. And he's created a card with a Voodoo VSA 100 processor on it. So that's the very same that was used in the Voodoo 4 series. And he's even increased the memory on it from 32, like the original, to 64 megabytes. The result is a Voodoo-powered laptop that has scored one of the highest ever 3D Mark benchmarks for a single chip Voodoo rig. There are no compromises. It is going flat out. This is a really fun project that kind of gives us an alternative history. The gaming laptop we didn't realize we wanted until now. It's an impressive feat of engineering by Daniel to have pulled this off. Yes, there is the caveat that this isn't a 2014 laptop because it's using that PCI Express port. But I don't think we should take anything away from it. I think this is really impressive what he's done. And it's almost a dream retro laptop, isn't it, to natively play games from an earlier age. Dave, what do you make of this project? And a slightly wider question, could laptops have saved 3DFX?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thanks for answering.
Laptops would not have saved them. It's certainly a cool thing to have, though. I think 3DFX would have needed to have not dropped the ball before that point to survive. They had this one small period of time. It felt like a lot longer, but this small period of time where all of a sudden you had to have a Voodoo card if you wanted to play certain games well. There was no alternative, a Voodoo card. They must have had money rolling in from it, and they weren't a massive company. But back then, you didn't need to be a massive company. These days, to compete in the graphics card market, you need to be the size of Intel, and even they are struggling to break their way into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, NVIDIA are they the biggest tech company now? Billions and billions their stocks are worth, yeah.
Yeah. Back then, it wasn't as big a market, so they did exist as a big enough company to do it, but they didn't manage to cost down enough. And then when the competitors came for them, the competitors didn't need to create new things. They just needed to work out what Glide was doing and then doing it along there. And once DirectX came along, they really struggled and they lost their unique selling point, and they had to compete with the rest of the pack, and they couldn't compete with the rest of the pack. So that was what did it there. As for what's created here, though, this is amazing. This is a brilliant way to properly play Voodoo games with a real Voodoo chip. I'm not sure if the laptop, I'm not sure if the screen is good enough for it. It's not going to be that kind of mushy kind of
not in 2014. Trails. I wouldn't have thought so. And I'm sure it's also got an external VGA port.
Yeah. So that it's really cool. What I'd like to see is new Voodoo cards appearing for desktop PCs, because when you look at the cost of vintage PC hardware, if it was in an office and it was on just a normal office desk, then you can get it pretty much for buttons now. But anything that was home user only and expensive is super expensive. Now, a Voodoo 2 is the one to have, and it's very, very expensive. So I'd like to see somehow new Voodoo cards, perhaps using FPGAs, or even some kind of cheap single thing like a Pico on a PCI card. That'd be good.
Are you thinking about new cards for classic hardware?
Yes.
Yeah, because I was thinking how nice it would be to have a card that perhaps is made to work with DOSBox, and that card can become many, many different things and work with DOSBox. But actually, we're talking about a period of time so long ago now that Glide can be very accurately emulated in DOSBox.
Yes,
All your sound cards can be emulated in software. You don't need it. I just like it's almost a romantic idea of having a slotting card to work with DOSBox.
There's nGlide, and nGlide is the software translation layer that came out that would let Glide run on other things, and it was eventually very good. But I'm thinking all you need to do to have a cheap Voodoo machine that runs DOS and Windows 95, Windows 98 stuff is really any PC that's heading towards the tip that has a PCI slot. Any one of those, you could stick this PCI thing in, and that's you, because they've almost all got onboard sound. So anything with a PCI slot from 2005 to 2015, for example, buttons ready for the tip, get it for next to nothing, stick this in it, and you've got this brilliant Voodoo rig.
You know what else was in the tip next to that radio yesterday? On top of the heap, there was a Medion branded Core i5 Tower PC laying there. And I'm sure it was probably absolutely fine or just needed a new hard drive or something. But that was a bit too big to smuggle out with me. So that's gone to landfill. Correcting myself again, NVIDIA is not the biggest tech company. It's come down again, but it was at number one briefly. As of today, it's Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, Alphabet or Google, Amazon. They're your top 5 largest companies by market cap in the world. But yeah, NVIDIA did briefly go to number one, largely powered by AI. So they're using the massive parallel processing power that they've developed originally for video games. Now for AI, of course, that's also important for the large amounts of processing in electric vehicles, or any vehicle for that matter, that want to become self-driving cars and analyze the world around them. All of this born out of that original competition with ATI and with 3DFX. So, the world has a lot to thank video games for, really, when you think about it like that. And we have Daniel to thank for showing us a 3DFX laptop. I do believe he says he doesn't have any plans to go into production with it, but he will be sharing all of it, I believe, in case if anyone else does want to produce one. Dave?
I assume it uses a real Voodoo chip. I have assumed
it
does, yeah.
Yeah, it uses that, what was it, the VSA 100 processor, and then an FPGA chip to just do all of the other bits around it and keep it small enough to go in a laptop. No mention of any heat problems with it. It does have the ability to overclock it, which I think he's still tweaking, so it might go faster again. But a really impressive feat, and I'd love to see more projects like this.
Welcome to Dave's Housekeeping. Such a great part of the show. Welcome to Dave's Housekeeping, a part of This Week in Retro, which is a podcast about retro computers and retro games. 8-bit and 16-bit stuff. Dave's Housekeeping. Yeah. Dave's Housekeeping.
I'd like to welcome on 3 new patrons this week. I'd like to welcome Mike, Anthony, and Raoul. So thank you very much for coming.
Welcome, guys. Thank you. Yes, question of the week later, we're going to come to about your favorite games with celebrity endorsements. That's last week's question of the week. So we're going to come to your answers, but there's also a bit of a secondary question that's come up around this, which was, what was the first ever game with a celebrity tie-in? So we got a huge response from this, didn't we? And everyone started commenting and hunting to try and find out. The example we gave last week was Daley Thompson's Decathlon from 1984.
And
so
you promised this was the earliest game, didn't you? You said, this is definitely the earliest game. I have no doubts about this.
I don't remember saying that, Dave, but I did need a holiday, so I'm going to take your word for it. The article suggested that it was one of the earliest. So what are some of the answers we've had from people, Dave, in this This hunt,
Yeah, so-
I like this. An investigation.
Yeah, it's Saturday morning when this show came out, podcast show, whichever. It started this hunt, and Hoffman came in first, suggesting Eddie Kidd's Jump Challenge, the same year as Daily, so 1984, but earlier in the year.
Oh, on what platform? I know that was on the Electron, wasn't it? It might have been the BBC Micro. It's on lots of systems, Spectrum. So we've already gone earlier than Daily.
Yep.
Greg Coons suggested Bruce Lee. That's also in 1984. A little bit on the fence about that because it's kind of a game based on the films rather than the celebrity, but it has got his name in it.
Yeah, I think
it is
counts.
just called Bruce Lee, isn't it?
Yeah,
So I think we'll count that one. Yeah.
Happy Coding came in with 3. He suggested Eddie Kidd and Bruce Lee, and he came up with an earlier one from 1983, one that he hoped would win just because of who it is, and I totally agree. Chuck Norris Super Kicks.
Wow, is that a football game?
I'm presuming it's a game where you kick people in the face with your specially produced genes.
Clivey suggested another 1984 one, but a little bit later than Chuck Norris. Ian Botham's Test Match Cricket. Beefy there, trying to take the crown, but Chuck Norris is beating him. Any others, Dave?
Jared Darridge suggested a 1983 game, 1-on-1 Dr. J versus Larry Bird.
Was that 1983? I thought that was later than that. Yeah.
So that's a basketball game, I think.
It is, yes, yeah. But what we think is the undisputed winner, at least as far as our audience suggestions are concerned, came from Jimbaloidatron. It's a game from 1981, and it's Pele's Soccer for the Atari VCS or 2600. Now, this was actually released originally as Championship Soccer in 1980. 80 was a World Cup year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it came out to time with that. But then it was re-released with a Pele tie-in, and apparently he also did the TV adverts to it, so he was fully invested in this. This is the earliest game we can find so far with a celebrity tie-in. So 1981, Pele's Soccer. We're happy to let this run. So if you can think of a game with a celebrity tie-in that's earlier than this one in 1981 or earlier, I swear there's got to be something in the 70s, you know? BCS out in 1976, there must have been some celebrity tie-ins.
People did suggest things like Elvis and Kiss Pinball, but it's not quite the same thing.
It's a pinball machine for a start. It's not a home computer title that we could go out and buy, but they're nice examples of celebrity endorsements. So the question will rumble on in the subreddit. reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro is where you can take part in that and also read all of the other stories that have been submitted, including those which are going to appear in Dave's briefs.
One thing before we go on to that, SDMat22 let us know that GOG, Good Old Games, I don't think they're called Good Old Games now, I think it's just GOG, are open to the idea of transferring library ownership on death. So this is something that we reported that Steam forbid. We're talking about digital ownership of games, and someone mentioned Steam don't allow you to transfer games even on death, so you can't put it in your will. But GOG have said, well, we're open to the idea, but you would need to prove you're dead. So I presume just show up with a form saying, look, I'm dead.
Game over.
Yeah.
In this week's News in Brief, these are the stories that we don't cover in too much detail, but we think may be of interest to you. Dictate Chester submitted this story. It's about the Super Nintendo version of Doom. There's a picture of a box of discs, and these are the discs containing the original source code, which has been discovered for the Super Nintendo version. Apparently, it didn't use any of the original code. It was coded from scratch for the Super Nintendo, which I guess it did well to do, and using the additional... Did it use the Super FX chip on the Super Nintendo?
I have no idea about Sega stuff.
Anyway, SNES source code for Doom has been discovered.
Pajako lets us know that Tarzan for the VCS, the 2600, has surfaced. It was never released. It seems to be a decent enough game. It did come out for the ColecoVision, but not the 2600. For some reason, it wasn't released. And our friend Reese actually covered this in depth on this week's Ramble podcast, if you want to hear about that.
Pajako6502 submitted the story that the mighty x86 processors are now 46 years old.
Pajako also told us that British Heart Foundation had a console handed in, a limited edition Hulk Xbox. Apparently this is very rare, and it's currently sitting with a few days to go at £7,800 on the old eBay. It finishes on Saturday at 9 p.m. BST. So if you are listening to this podcast on release, you'll get to click and see where it's at now if it's moved from that £7,800. And if you want to, you can watch the end of the auction. I sometimes like doing that.
It's a very green Xbox, the Hulk version, isn't it? I don't know why it's so rare, but if you click on the story, you can read it and find out. 42 Nobody 42 has submitted a video by Carrie on 80s video game protection systems, including the infamous lens lock. And it's a nice insight from Carrie because she's of the younger generation, so she's exploring and explaining these things from a fresh perspective.
Christ of Why Don't You talks about a feature that was hidden in Tamagotchis, which were these little keychain pets, virtual pets that you had.
I had one.
Did you?
Yeah, I had one, yeah.
I was slightly too old for them when they came out, so I never had one. I thought they were rubbish.
Oh,
but it turns out
you didn't have to be young to have a Tamagotchi. I think I was at least 18 or 19.
I was at that point where I was trying to be old, if you know what I mean. Like, oh, I'm far too cool for that. Not at that point now, though. It turns out it's a hidden character you can unlock if you do things in a certain order, and you can get these special new characters in your Tamagotchi.
Brilliant. I did read it. The process takes something like 80 hours to unlock these characters, so you've got to be pretty dedicated to get there. Christ of Why Do You has submitted a story about the game The Thing from 2002, which in turn was based on the 1982 film. The Thing it was well reviewed back in 2002. I remember my flatmate being absolutely obsessed by it. Absolutely loved it. Hi, JP, if you're listening. The Thing is now getting a remaster. So if you were a fan of that, or a fan of horror thriller games in general, then that's something to look forward to.
Elk 1984 lets us know about the PIDP-10, which is a replica of the PDP-10 mainframe from 1966. I often find when I look at the roots of old games that they often go further back than the Apple II. They often go back as far as the PDP-10, things like Space War and so on. So a lot of the games that would eventually come to home micros and arcades have their roots in the PDP-10.
Yeah, it's a lovely story because it shows a really beautiful mini recreation of the PDP-10, or the PDP-1, wasn't it? 1 or 10, can't remember. But in the story, the panel with all the switches. So you've got your Pi, you've got all the switches you can place, click down and up, and you can play Computer Space and all the rest of it. Christ of Why Do You has submitted a story about Shenmue. It's, for those of you who don't know, an action-adventure game for the Dreamcast. It was a sprawling game, probably one of the best games of the platform. And it also had the best feature of any game on the platform, which was an arcade you could go into and play Outrun and other Sega games in there. And it's a game that's loved, and it did get a sequel. It took a long, long time for the sequel to come out, and the fans want more, so much so that a Shenmue fan has paid for a billboard asking for a new game to be made. God knows how much they're spending on it, but that's how much they want a new installment of the game.
Neil, if you get enough money, can we do one for Ultima? Ultima Redux.
Ultima, yeah, I guess. Where's EA's offices? We'd have to put it outside EA's offices.
Pajako has let us know that people have been trying to get the perfect shot in Wii Billiards, and they have decompiled the code to find the secrets and then worked out and then executed the perfect shot using the Wiimote thing.
What a time to be alive. Aer Lingus has submitted a story about a new type of flash cart system, which, it's a flash cart that can be adapted to work on different systems. If you've got multiple retro systems, you'll know how much it can cost to buy all of the different flash carts, and you can only play on one at a time. So this is quite a novel system that will allow you to move the adapter, the flash cart, between your different systems. It's $130 for one, and then $20 for each adapter. Dave, used to you?
Yeah. I've our friend Chrissy, I think, has ordered this. But I've actually, it's a backbit cartridge system, and I've ordered the backbit. I've actually got the backbit tester for integrated circuits for little chips. So the person who does this, I think she really knows what she's doing. But the list is incredible of all the things it's compatible with. All sorts of niche systems like the GX4000 or the Dick Smith, or the Tomy Tutor.
I can see the IBM PC Junior, the Fairchild Channel F, the Super Cassette Vision, loads of things on there.
Spectrum and all the rest of it, all different sorts of things. And it means that if you have maybe a system you use all the time, you might want to have its own flash cart for it. But systems that you don't use too often, buy this and then the adapter for it. The Amiga might have died because Commodore failed to innovate and deliver better products. Expanding your Amiga meant using a Zorro slot, not the industry standard ISA or PCI. You couldn't use a PC drive without some modifications, and by the time Commodore passed away, PC architecture had left IBM behind and become very modular, yet inexpensive. In fact, the 486 to Pentium era is probably the most modular PCs that we've ever seen. The motherboard had very little on it. You need to add cache RAM chips, separate I/O cards, no built-in graphics and no built-in sound. There's less of that in modern PCs, but they're still pretty modular. And that's where today's story steps in, thanks to Uncommitted Logic for submitting it. It's a project from Jason Neus, and it's called Amiga PCI. And I should probably explain what PCI is so you can all understand why it's such a good thing. So Neil, tell our listeners what PCI stands for.
It stands for peripheral, or if I was Dave, peripheral component interconnect.
Peripheral.
I've heard you say peripheral before.
I did add in the notes what you should have said, Neil. What should you have said according to my notes?
You don't put words into my mouth, Dave.
That's the problem here.
You tried to set me up for a silly joke.
Yes, I tried to get
write
you to
my
say
own jokes.
Potatoes, carrots, and onions. I even put your accent in. Yes, it means peripheral component interconnect, and it ended up being the successor to ISA slots after the usual competing format wars, which saw things like MCA, eISA, and VLB have some success, but ultimately fade away, leading boards with some having ISA and PCI slots. Sorry, with some ISA slots and some PCI slots for a long period of time before eventually it turned into some PCI and some PCIe. PCI had several advantages over ISA. It was 32-bit, not 16 or 8. It ran a lot faster too, so a huge amount more data could go to a PCI slot compared to an ISA. It's not just that, though. It went on to become plug-and-play to help avoid conflicts. And in fact, it's not unusual to still see PCI in some modern PCs, although we're now finally dropping the last remnants of that in favour of PCIe.
Yeah, and in the context of Amigas, they had ISA slots. They had ISA slots, Dave. But those slots were designed with the bridge board in mind. So if you had the PC bridge board, which turns your Amiga effectively into an IBM PC compatible, you could then put your ISA cards in there. But without that, you were just using Zorro cards in the slots.
Another thing the board does is get around the Amiga accelerator issue. On other Amigas, you'll have a CPU, usually a 68K, sometimes a faster one, but it will be on the board, and you would have to use an accelerator to replace that. But this board has a CPU slot similar to what PCs did with Pentium 2s and 3s.
Depends on your Amiga, Dave. actually, some
I'm going to
Amigas,
actually you.
some Amigas did have CPU cards and slots back in the day. So the 2000, for example, you could slot in a CPU card and it would override the standard 68,000 on the board. 4000 had CPU cards, except for the cost-reduced 4000 where they'd soldered the CPU on. So varied from model to model. Go on, you're going to actually me back.
Yeah. What I mean is that unlike the 2000, this doesn't have a CPU on it at all, so you have to use the CPU slot. The CPU is modular. Yeah.
So very much like the slot 1 Pentium 3 style.
Yeah,
deal.
And by the sounds of things, like the 4000. Amiga Fast RAM is also on this card as well. And the Hackaday title for this is the Amiga we all wanted in 1993, and I'm going to disagree with it. And what I don't mean is that I didn't want an Amiga in 1993. I'm not saying that's why I disagree. If I was an Amiga fan back then, I would have wanted something that was cheaper than a PC, that came with a hard disk, some kind of Mode 13H, and a Sound Blaster, all pre-packaged to bring the cost down as low as possible. And the important thing for the Amiga is making sure that everyone had the same base spec, and the base spec was good enough. Because we saw with the Amiga, if it came out with just the base spec, then that's what games were made for.
Yeah, we know what Amiga we wanted in 1993, and it was something more than what the Amiga 600 or the 1200 delivered. And that's not to take away from this project, but we can see on this project that it is using those original custom chips. So it's not delivering more, it's just delivering it in a different format with some bells and whistles.
Yeah. I don't know if Commodore could have delivered us what I'm asking for there. I'm not sure they could have. But it doesn't mean I don't like the project. It is great, but it will need to catch on. It'll need to get popular, and the developer will need to be there to support it, so that there's a critical mass of users with it in order for development to be justified. Issues to be identified, drivers, etc., to exist. Although one of my friends did tell me that Thor, who is a prolific Amiga developer, is already aware of this, and he's already doing stuff with PCI and the Amiga, which should translate across this very neatly. So this is coming at perhaps the right time for it. I guess for me, I should say the Amiga stops at the 1200. And even the 1200 in some ways is just a souped up 500. Going further with things like retargetable graphics, third-party sound cards, etc., I might be able to play Quake in it. I'm not interested in that. I'll stick with PCs for that. So for me, this isn't what I want from my Amiga. I don't want PCI for Amiga, but that doesn't mean it's bad. There's plenty of people who do want an Amiga like this. Do you fancy it, Neil?
Do I fancy it? Well, I fancy seeing what Thor comes up with this PCI card, so that's exciting. But what really stands out for me on this project is that it is in an ATX form factor. So from a convenience point of view, brilliant. Brand new Amiga that you can just slap in a modern case and you can drop it in and it will fit. That's really appealing. Looking at the board, actually, I didn't see an ATX power supply connector, so I'm guessing, is it just powered from a barrel jack on the outside?
I'm not sure. I looked for it briefly and then forgot about it after not seeing it to find out how it is powered.
Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't need very much power, but yeah, there will be a way of powering it. We can be sure of that.
Do you think?
I just didn't know if you'd use the ATX power supply in your PC or not. Anyway, it also uses original custom chips, so you will need a broken old Amiga to pull those from, or of course FPGA alternatives. I guess you could put a PyStorm in it if you wanted, perhaps. No, it would need to be compatible with the CPU slot, but maybe there'll be an adapter board. Anyway, it's very much a project in development by the looks of things, so it will be exciting to see what they come up with. On the topic of the PCI slots, to be honest, they don't excite me massively. I'm sure Thor has the capability of changing that, but currently, I don't know. I mean, you could add PCI slots to your Amiga back in the day with something called the Mediator, and then you could put a Voodoo card into those slots. You could put a Voodoo 3 in your Amiga if you really wanted, and for the low cost of £10,000, let's say, you could run Quake. So PCI slots did exist, and I guess this opens up a cost-effective way to go back and, well, let's be honest, what our nostalgic hobby is about, reliving the dreams and trying the things you could never afford at the time. So here's a way that makes that more affordable if you wanted to. Yeah, it's convenient. It does remain quite authentic to the period. For example, it does only output at 15 kilohertz video, but it does have a video slot, so you can upgrade that.
Yeah, I think the intention is that it has ECS on it, so OCS ECS on it, and it'll default to that. But the intention is you're buying this, you wouldn't buy this and not use the PCI slots, surely. So you'd be using the graphics card that you plug into there. So then you've got presumably 30 kilohertz from that.
Presumably, yeah. I mean, for example, it doesn't have HDMI as standard. We're not going to that level of convenience, and it's not even pretending to be that convenient. It's just being an interesting hybrid that expands on those original Amigas. Honestly, I would just be happy to have the ATX form factor. When it comes to PCI, I guess it's going back to what we were talking about with DOSBox earlier. I'm quite happy with FPGA and the promise of virtual devices. If you could stick an FPGA chip on there, I know it's got some on there, but not working in this way. But if you had, again, I don't know, FPGA PCI bus, if you like, the FPGA is controlling everything on it. And at the push of a button, I can just add a 24-bit chunky graphics card or a sound card or multiple cards. I'd love to be able to do that. But maybe that's what we will get in the form of these PCI cards. Maybe you'll get a PCI card with FPGA on, like I wanted for DOSBox, but it will work with this Amiga hardware. I don't know. I think we've just got to be happy that it exists and excited for what might come next. Just keep an eye on it. I don't really have anything negative to say other than show me what I can do with it. Show me what I can do with it. And maybe I've got plenty of spare ATX cases to put one in.
You can do it now if you want. You can order the PCB, you can solder it up and program the FPGA, and you can get going. So it's certainly not a finished project, but it is one that you could engage with if you wanted to get your teeth into a new project. And I hope that we continue to talk about this. I hope it ends up being... I like the idea of having an Amiga PCB like this that takes all the original custom chips, but you can replace them with FPGA if you want to. Even the CPU slot, I'm presuming a Pi Storm, as you mentioned, could be adjusted to go into that CPU slot and provide all the memory and the CPU and all the rest of it. So perhaps you could get an entirely new Amiga or a combination from it. I like the idea of that. So I hope this project succeeds. Link in the show notes.
Time now for our community question of the week. This all happens at reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro, where you will find the latest question of the week pinned to the top. Dave will now take it out of contest mode while I read you what the question was. So last week's question was, what is your favorite game which features a celebrity? Obscure celebs are welcome, and ideally their name should be in the title of the game, but not essential. Duncan adds, no doubt Chris from 005 Agema will pick one featuring Linda Lusardi. He knows Chris so well. So, are we out of contest mode, Dave?
We are.
Okay.
Loads of answers. Loads of answers.
Okay, top answer.
Sometimes as many as normal.
Top answer comes from Richard Shears. He says, I'm going for the first game I can remember being celebrity endorsed, that being Jimmy White's Snooker, which I believe you got in trouble for not mentioning, Dave, by another commenter.
I should have remembered it. And I was thinking, as we were recording last week, I was thinking, I don't really remember playing many sports games, so this doesn't really apply to me. Of course, Jimmy White's Snooker. Great game.
Yeah. So Richard says, really enjoyed the game, being a bit of a fan of playing snooker. I wasn't that great at the game, but I really enjoyed it nonetheless. Yeah, he says Daley Thompson's Decathlon was probably the first game I recall playing on my mate Specky, but I was never a fan of the joystick wagglers, and to be fair, my mate quickly grew tired of it. I'm sure he wanted to save... I'm not going to read that last line. Carry on, Dave. Next answer.
I'm sure he wanted to save the wrist exercise for other moments. I presume he means tennis or swing
tennis,
ball.
That's what he wanted to save his wrist for. Okay, carry on swiftly.
Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker on the Atari ST was fantastic. The physics, it's the first game that this I ever played that the physics were absolutely bang on. Archer McLean made it. It's such a good game. It feels so real.
Yeah.
Chromatic Ore says, definitely Chuck Yeager's Air Combat on the PC. We forgot about Flight Sims, did we?
We did, and the Jaeger bomb.
I was never a fan of proper flight sims, but the easy-to-play game with its dogfighting focus mechanics and the amazing Tall Tales mission generators made SIAC so much fun to pick up and play, including coming up with some truly wild, era-spanning scenarios. There I was in the early afternoon over Berlin in my F-15 Strike Eagle when suddenly I was jumped by at least 8 FW-109s.
Nice. It's tomorrow now, says, for me, it simply has to be Colin McRae Rally as a 6-year-old getting my first PS1 and the aforementioned title as well as Gran Turismo 2. It was the start of my love for all things racing games and motorsports in general. Eventually, I migrated over to PC and picked up a cheap game from Comet in the mid to late 2000s. It was Richard Burns Rally, still considered one of the most realistic rally games of all time, despite being over 20 years old. Got me into sim racing and blowing countless amounts of time and money into iRacing and Assetto Corsa. It's difficult to say how much these two games inspired me and countless others to get into motorsports and sim racing. R.I.P. Colin McRae and Richard Burns. Yeah, I loved Colin McRae on my PC. I didn't have it on the PS1, but it was good fun on the PC. Let's flick through some of the many other answers. Fuskit says, does Sid Meier count?
No. Sid Meier was a developer. It wasn't. But then again, you bought it because his name was in it. I know.
And so therefore, he was a celebrity.
An example he gives, Fiskett says, colonization. He mentions for the Amiga. I played it on the PC. But it says Sid Meier's colonization. That was the endorsement. Putting his name would get people to buy it because you think, oh, he made Civilization. So, yeah. Ooh. Does it count? I think so.
Okay. Duncan has nailed it. 005 Agima comments. Maria Whittaker's Christmas box. He says, I don't even like poker.
So it mentions Captain Blood on the Atari ST with the digitized music from Jean-Michel Jarre.
Percentage Shot and Osprey Shower, a couple of Kiwis reminiscing over their love of Jonah Lomu's rugby.
Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX. I didn't even know Hoffman did BMX.
There's a shout out here for Jonah Barrington's squash on the ZX Spectrum.
Jockey Wilson's darts challenge on the ZX Spectrum. Loads of answers there. So many people have answered this week.
Yeah, Mike Tyson's Punch Out, Michael Jackson's A Moonwalker, Mavis Beacon teaches typing.
That's legitimate.
Well, was Mavis Beacon a real person or just made up for the program?
But
I don't think
thought
they were
she
real.
was a real. I know she was made up, but you thought she was a real person.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, yeah. Captain Blood. Then Captain Blood wasn't a real person.
No, but that was in reference to Jean-Michel Jarre being in it.
Yeah, but he was. Yeah, I know.
Mario Andretti's Racing. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Loads and loads of answers. So do go and have a read through on the subreddit. And that brings us to this week's community question of the week. We spoke about Winamp getting a physical version this week. And we'd like to know, what virtual thing would you like to see become a reality? What do you want to put on your desk? What do you want to drive? What do you want to fly or touch that until now has only been ones and zeros in a computer?
Did you see the new note that Duncan put on there? Please put the question here so poor Duncan doesn't have to watch the video to type it out. Poor Duncan.
Oh, poor Duncan. I have typed it out for you, Duncan. So that is our question of the week. Get thinking. Even you, 005 Agima.
Oh, no.
What do you want that until now has been virtual to become a reality? What do you want to put on your desk, drive, fly, or touch? That has only been ones or zeros until now. Head to reddit.com/r/this week in retro to participate. Also, please, any interesting retro news stories that you see, just dump them in the subreddit. And you have to do nothing more than that. Just copy a link, paste it, and we'll go from there. And other people enjoy reading the stories that you submit, even if they don't make it to the show. It's a wonderful resource to keep up to date. For up-to-date news for out-of-date tech, as they say.
What a great strapline that would be, Neil.
Would be. And a very special thank you to our twirlers, the official patrons of the show who support us, who put a little tip into the hat every month to keep things going and to, well, it's a great source of encouragement, isn't it, Dave, to know that people are enjoying what we do.
A special hello to Boatfest attendees. I think Boatfest is this weekend.
Hello, Boatfest attendees. All aboard.
Yes.
Head to patreon.com/This Week in Retro. All of the links are in the show notes to everything we've talked about today. And a special thank you to poor Duncan. Thank you for watching, everyone, and listening, and enjoy the rest of your weekends. Take care. Bye-bye. He's waving. He's waving in his official Cave Dweller merch hoodie. rmcretro.store.
Stop shelling.
Bye.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.